Hello, and welcome to Sacred Democracy, the final episode. Thank you for joining us. So, today we are going to talk about sacred education, moving from indoctrination to inspiration. And I have with me Marianne Franzese, who's the founder of Spark Elementary and a dear friend, and also a creative arts therapist, and Rhonda Hair, who has a degree in elementary education. Is it, Rhonda?
It is.
Yes?
Yes, it is.
And is a homeschooler and a mom. And we may have Carolina Allen joining us later. She had a family issue, and unfortunately, Linda Chambers had a work scheduling issue, so she won't be with us. But we are going to start anyway. So the reason that I really wanted to do this as the final episode is because everything that we do in the Women's Oneness Project, and even for me personally, is really related to how it affects the children. And in the way the Haudenosaunee talk of it, we have to make decisions and consider how it will affect the next 7 generations. And with COVID, with everything that's going on now, we have some big decisions to make, especially about the schooling of our children. And so I wanted to invite Marianne and Rhonda here today because they are experts in different styles of schooling and where the future of education should be. So I wanted to show you my new favorite book, The End of School. Can you guys see this? It's by Zachary Slayback, and it is actually it's a really good book. I mean, very controversial title, but he just makes a brilliant idea. He just takes a brilliant idea and really fleshes it out. It is a wonderful book on this topic. And I just want to read this one brief paragraph in the intro where he says, education and school are not the same thing, and they often run counter to each other. When school and education conflict, education ought to be valued above school. If school is a tool for providing education and it fails to do that, then school, like the hammer that doesn't screw in a nail, should be disposed of in favor of something that does get the job done. So that partly goes to the idea of that we've all talked about before. What is education about? What is our goal in educating children? So I'm going to ask you, Marianne, if you want to start out with that, because you and I have had a lot of discussions on that topic, and then we'll go to Rhonda.
We have, and part of thinking about it in terms of sacred education, right? We've talked about education so much, and the founding of Spark was really about turning education on its head and reimagining it, but still within the structure of an institution. It's a school, right? A small school, but things are done differently, allowing for more inspiration. But Maddi, when we were Maddi and I were taking this restorative justice class. And in the class, the leader, Eric Butler, posed a question, and it was, what would you die for? And can you live for that? So what came to me immediately was, I would die to keep my own children from harm. And as a mother, because I think that mother is really the heart of education, especially with young children, can we keep our children from harm in the current state of education? And I don't think we can. And this is a big moral dilemma. We are given in New York State 150-page guideline, and all the great thinkers, everybody is scrambling to put the puzzle together. How are we going to do this? Let's get these desks, let's get double schedule, let's offer 3 options. All school, home, being at home, a hybrid. So we're faced with this problem, and being in education, most educators are problem solvers, right? So we go to come up with a solution to the problem. But I think that what we're not really seriously looking at is, will this form of education do harm? To have children sitting far apart with masks on, possibly exposing them to a virus, possibly having their teachers exposed, being on the computer for so many hours a day. What are we doing? I see the vulnerability of children entering my space. The little ones coming in, and just the need for love and connection and holding and mess. There is a need for that. It can't be there right now. And even though all of us will follow the rules very strictly, I'm sure the first month, things start to loosen up. Some kids who are rule followers will be riddled with anxiety about those who aren't following the rules exactly as they're supposed to be. So I think that we are really at a crossroads of being inconvenienced for the sake of our children in a way where I really love the model of the little pods of education that are starting to crop up, of multi-ages coming together in a safe space to begin to learn, but also to have nature really as their classroom, and just what's happening more through experience. So I do think there is a lot of challenge right now, and I think that challenge is getting us to think beyond just a response to COVID.
Right.
Like, we have to come back to, like you said, Maddi, it's like, how is this going to impact this generation by forcing them to be educated in this way? So it's a dilemma. It's a moral dilemma for me right now. Definitely.
It really is. I think for everybody, really, anybody whose heart is in it, it's a moral dilemma for sure. So Rhonda, I'm going to ask you what you're seeing and what you're hearing out there.
Okay, so Utah, we've got some different rules in Utah. We have a 3-page guideline, which is still a lot of rules. It really is a lot of rules still. And we still have the same concerns of how do we have people meet together and be safe? So as a homeschooler, I don't have my children home all the time. I think that's one of the big misperceptions. We don't just sit home. We have groups that we meet with. We have activities we go out and participate. We go to museums. We go on field trips. We do all kinds of things as we're looking at this kind of broader idea of what education is. And one of the groups that I meet with, we have a group of about 30 families that help educate each other's children, and we meet once a week. We're trying to figure out the logistics of even getting that size group to be safe. So we divide up by ages, not exactly grades, but close to that. And we have a Methodist church building that we rent that we usually are meeting in, but that building is closed. Nobody is allowed to be in that building for worship or for classes or anything else. So that's off the table. So now we're on plan B or possibly plan C that we're trying to figure out. And what looks like the best option for us right now is going to be just meeting in homes. That we'll have one group in a home. We can sit apart from each other. We can wash our hands a lot. But if we have those smaller groups, the smallest group, of course, is going to be the family. But there are people who, we need each other. Mothers need other mothers. We need the support of other families, other people around us. And if we can meet in smaller groups, it at least minimizes a lot of the exposure. But the biggest thing is, as you said, Maddi, education and schooling are not necessarily the same thing. And I think this is a great opportunity to look into what education really means to you as a parent. Right. Whoever you are, whatever your situation is, what does education really mean to you? And what do you want to have happen in your children's lives as a result of this 50 years from now, or that 7 generations down from now? That's what we need to be looking at in what education is. And this is a great opportunity. It's kind of forcing us into reevaluating everything to begin with.
Yeah, that's the way I see it. I see it as an opportunity to really open our minds, to look at what other cultures are teaching, to look at the American Indian philosophy of you don't just throw a bunch of stuff into a child's brain. You're educating them, but you're also watching them to see what their talents are, what their gifts are, what they're interested in, so that you can guide them along that path, which will create a happy human being who's capable of giving their own life meaning. And I think the problem that we face with standardized education is that we give children the idea that they have to fit into a box, and we take away from them the ability to really make their own decision about who they want to be. And this is the opportunity we are presented with right now. I agree with you totally, Rhonda, is to look at natural education, to look at maybe we do go outside more and what are we learning while we're outside, to look at kids can't sit in front of a computer screen. So like you said, for an hour, 2 hours, it's terrible for them every day. So what can we teach in a new way, and how can we look at them and let them guide our education? When Zachary Slayback is talking about the end of school, he's really talking about going back to that old indigenous way of education, where part of the teacher's job is to watch the child and to see what, especially when they're young, to see what their aptitudes are, what their interests are, and encourage and develop that, so that they don't, what doesn't happen to them is what has happened to a lot of us, is that they don't lose their love of learning, that they become more and more invested in learning newer and newer things because they're more curious about that. You know, and certainly this is an opportunity where we can take them outside, or we can have them build projects where we can, you know, I just think if we really look at, there's so many examples, so many styles of homeschooling, so many styles of in-school schooling, Waldorf, Montessori, what's the one you use, Marianne, the arts one? I always forget. Reggio, right? So there's all these styles that actually are much more easily adapted to this kind of fluid situation we're in than the core curriculum. And the core curriculum idea, I think, has been pretty well disproven, the one size fits all style. And because the only way you can make that happen is to be on a computer 2 or 3 hours a day with a kid. And that's just untenable. It's just,
they don't all learn at the same speed anyway.
Right. And that's what homeschoolers have taught us, you know, and certainly people like you, Marianne, who have had a school that has a different take on the way we educate our children. And Montessori, certainly with her idea that you don't really have grades, you know, you have, if you accomplish reading in a third grade, you're reading at a 5th grade level, and then you go and you read at that level. We're not really saying you have to stay here forever and ever. And then, like you were saying, you get that nice mix of ages and kids helping each other, kids teaching each other, which I think happens a lot in homeschooling, right, Rhonda?
It does. It does a lot. So one of the things that I've seen, Marianne, as I've looked into your school that I really admire about your school is that you work very closely with the parents. And I think as we're looking at how this is making us rethink about education with COVID, it really brings it back home. And if we seize that opportunity to have it be more family-centric, parent-centric, that alone would transform our education system.
Totally agree.
I would agree too. And parents are just an amazing resource. But one of the things that we're seeing with this issue, right, is that schools also help parents to be able to work, right? So we've heard a lot about seeing teachers as babysitters, school as a daycare. I don't think that working parents are saying that at all. I think it's, again, our system and the way that our economy works has been set up so that kids can be in school a certain time, parents can be at their work. And I think, again, one of the opportunities of this time is that many parents have been able to work from home. But
Right.
working from home and educating your child is a conflict also. So I think we have to really rethink and be able to support families in being able to fully be involved in the education. Otherwise, we are putting families in a situation of greater stress and conflict. So one of the things when we were remote, our parents were really feeling the pressure of having to sit beside their child and also deal with work. And that became something that we had to work with them and with the kids and with our style of curriculum to not add that added pressure. I do think that the system, ultimately, if we can support families in being able to have an active role in educating their kids, I think that's an incredible transformation of it all, because there is this separation that I think isn't integrated. It creates a disconnect. In a small private school, we're able to be very connected with our parents, but in education as a whole, we don't see that as much. And so I would love to be able to, again, as we're trying to create visions for the future, is actually look at how as a society can we in fact support that level of partnership. Because right now there is a divide between homeschooling parents and parents of kids in more traditional educational institutions, right?
Right.
It is time to meet somewhere in the middle of that. I think that's an amazing vision.
You know, you mentioned your school and private schools, you have the ability to work more one-on-one with parents. And I think what it comes down to is who gets to make the decisions. So with a private school, you have a much smaller group and the parents have a lot of input. Utah has, I believe, 5 of the largest school districts in the nation. So we have 5 school districts that have more than 60,000 students in them apiece.
Whoa.
So you can imagine what parental input looks like in that situation.
Not much.
No, it's not. You know, a crowded school board meeting may have 800 parents there, but that represents, what, 0.5% of the parents in the district, let alone the people who are paying the taxes and don't have children in the schools.
Right.
There's no building that will fit it. Well, rent a stadium, I suppose, but nobody wants to rent a stadium for a school board meeting.
Right, that's incredible. And not only parents, but students' involvement in policy making. So we had our student body who really lobbied to get rid of homework. They just felt like homework just creates so much extra stress. They don't get to play. So we gave them the charge to go ahead and do your research. See what the effects of homework are. And they came back with studies that say homework in elementary school is basically useless. And what it does is it just creates tension and fights between parents and kids to get it done. So we were like, okay, we are going to eliminate homework, but we're going to have to take on your parents. Parents did not like the idea of us taking away homework. And we had to convince them, because parents came from a mindset of, you need homework. How do we know then? These were their fears, what they're learning in school. So we had to develop reflections, ways for them to know what's going on, ways that they talk about it. And, but it actually took a good, hard conversation with parents to get them on board and to trial it with us. So ultimately, if we can get children invested and trust that what they're saying that they want to learn and not want to learn has some merit to it. is like, that to me is keeping the like power alive in kids, in shaping where their education goes.
Well, and that fits in with the idea of planning out for the 7 generations ahead. That's great if we want to plan 7 generations ahead, but if that generation we're teaching doesn't buy into it and doesn't have that same vision, it won't go on.
Right.
Right.
That.
Right.
Exactly. And well, that's even similar. One of the reservation schools, they did the same thing. The kids wanted, they do the meeting where the parents and the kids and the teachers all get together, right? And they help design curriculum, and the kids called for a meeting. They didn't want homework anymore, just like your kids did, Marianne. And what that school came up with is they came up with the idea, well, okay, no homework. We get it. You want family time, you want free time, wonderful, but we're going to go to school a half an hour longer because we got to make sure that this stuff is being learned. Kids that need help have the time to get help. And they actually decided to go to school like an hour longer. Like once
we did the same thing.
Yeah.
Actually, that's so funny. We're very creative in a way, right? That's
I
great.
know. So when we sit, and that's a really important model, what you did with your kids, what that school did with their kids, is they sat together in a circle, in a traditional circle, and they said, what do you need? What do you want? And everybody talked about it. And then they came to a conclusion that they could all agree on. And that's the power of consensus and patience and sitting in circles, that traditional idea of not, and he talks a lot about that in this book, of not just dictating to a child, this is what's going to happen. Because then little by little, you chip away at their self-confidence, you chip away at their imagination, which is terrible. And I think that, of course, there are going to be situations where you're going to have to go, no, we really can't do that. Where you're just going to have to be the grown-up and say, we'd love to have that giant rock climbing. What was it somebody was telling me about? They wanted to go rock climbing. That was their, their field trip they voted to take was rock climbing. And the parents and the teachers just had to go, no, that is not going to be a school field trip, that would require 2 ambulances to be there. And we don't have enough liability insurance for all of that. So there are going to be times when.
Yes, when it comes to safety, for sure, because it goes back to do no harm. We're not going to put you in harm's way. But it's also interesting. We had some kids push back against the annual science fair, right? The science project. Oh, we don't want to do a science project again. So this year we were shut down with COVID. So we said, instead of science project, let's do a spark project where you observe the thing you love doing best during COVID naturally and create it into a project. They love that idea. We're going to get to do it with cooking or gardening or building a chair. And they had a lot of enthusiasm. We structured it that they really had to develop this idea from start to finish. And they hit the same kinds of obstacles that they hit with science project, which is it gets hard to follow a procedure, to collect your data, to see what works, to fail and then have to redo. And it brought such a beautiful opportunity of comparison, because even when you are doing something you love, when you commit to really take a project from start to finish, there are going to be obstacles, right? And so science, not that they didn't like science projects. It's not science that's the big pain in the neck. It's the idea of this process of creating something. And so now they had this comparison and this model of, oh, so whenever we create, we should expect to hit a point where we don't like it. Yes!
Yes, you should.
And keep going. You will. That is the most natural thing of creating. Don't give up. See it through. In the end, you'll have something that you've had discovered. So sometimes giving kids what they want, as long as it's not harmful,
Right.
helps them to discover it might not be what they think it is.
Right.
And it might hold some universal truths that they otherwise wouldn't have come to. So it's really, I'm all about listen to the kids. They will point us in the direction, but with good leadership, you can take those ideas and have the opportunity to learn whatever may come your way from it.
Exactly. And I think it gives you, I think that style of education, without the worrying about the testing, with the where you're creating something, or the child has picked their own project. That style also gives you resilience. There's that built-in teaching of, I'm going to make a mistake and I'm not going to quit. And so I'm going to be able to bounce back. I noticed I'm looking at a lot of the me being me, at a lot of the spiritual teachers and what they're focusing on lately, the ones I really love, I look at a lot of the ones that are on the Gaia network, and a lot of what's going on now, a lot of what they're focusing on is resilience. Because what they're seeing is that in this time where everything is so chaotic and so, what's really hurting people, the rise in suicide rates, the rise in drug abuse and alcoholism, is they don't have a sense of resilience, of being able to bounce back. And when we're young, we're in an educational situation where we get to bounce back without criticism, without the idea you're doing it wrong, with just discovering for ourselves that, yes, it's harder than we thought to create. Yes, we're going to make mistakes and we have to keep going. That gives you that built-in sense from the time you're little of being resilient. And I think back when I grew up and you didn't have the testing and you had, 3 recesses a day, and you had a lot of art and a lot of music and phys ed every single day, there was a lot of time to do that problem solving through play, through which is something that is going to be missing as we try to not, we're pulling out of socialization. But I think it also goes back to, Marianne, what you talked about with getting parents in a place where they understand how important these different styles of learning are, and homework isn't always the best choice for everybody. So I think I have this great poem I have to read about play. And it actually, the other nice thing about playing, aside from that you discover and you create, how many games did we make up as kids? I don't know about your kids, Rhonda, but when I was little, we made up some of them were ridiculous, but so what? Who cared?
Some of them you have to put a stop to.
Right.
My 5-year-old got together with his buddy across the street and they came up with this game called Punch the Chicken. Like, no! That game!
No punching the chicken. And that's where you do have to be the adult sometimes. Like, no, we're not going on the rock climbing expedition as a school, and we're not going to do the game Punch the Chicken. But this is a great poem. I love this. Boston College psychologist Peter Gray summarizes playing as learning with this sonnet posted at his blog. It is a good way to think lightly on the subject. He says, in play, we learn to think in ways most clear. In play with others, we resolve our strife. In play, we laugh at what provokes our fear. In play, we soar above our routine life. In play, we learn to follow rules we share, assert ourselves while making others smile. In play, what's right is what to all is fair. In play, it's fun to go the extra mile. And so to you, the God of play, we pray, please keep our ludic spirits liveliness as we approach the trials of each day. Protect us from our over seriousness. From dust to dust, we all end up the same. What counts in life is how we play the game. And I mean, I just thought that was so absolutely perfect and wonderful. And he talks about earlier, freedom is the cure to this resentment of learning. Sure, learning by playing outside may not look like schooling, but it is much more in line with how young humans have come to learn over time. By not imposing what must be learned and therefore not frustrating the expectations of the young, we allow them to flourish in their relationship with learning, or at least come to repair it after damage done by well-meaning educators and not so well-meaning planners. And I mean, this is what we're seeing. Well, you know that, Rhonda, is we're coming up against government expectations. You know, we're coming up against bureaucratic expectations of what education should be. And when you talk about the history of planned education in this country for the last 100 years, you know, it was the public education was definitely planned as a way to create employees. So this is our opportunity to break out of that. This really is our opportunity to say, no, this is
well,
not.
It goes back even further than that. So in my church, we've got a history. I'm a member of what they call Mormons, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We have an interesting educational history in our religion, because when Brigham Young brought the first group out into Utah, well, what became Utah later on, of course, they were educating themselves. There was nobody else. By the 1880s, 1890s, there were other groups coming in and working really hard to get the children to believe differently than their parents. And that's when we started really having the rise of the public schools in Utah. But I was doing a little reading this morning about how the Native Americans taught their children traditionally. And it was basically you'd be with your parents, you'd be with your mother, your father, learning the work. Your grandparents would usually play a big role in this. And the same time that my religion was being attacked for their beliefs, they were attacking the Native Americans the same way and forcing enrollment into boarding schools for these little Native American children because they wanted to break them away from their traditions and their generations and their teachings.
Yep.
Exactly. And as I think about this idea of teaching for 7 generations, planning out for 7 generations, it occurred to me that there are at least 3 fundamental pieces at the foundation of that you cannot plan for 7 generations without recognizing these 3 things. One is family as the basic order of civilization. They're even counting it in terms of family basis, generations. That's the core of everything. And so anything that we do in education needs to recognize the family as the core unit of society. And any definition of success must include looking at how well our children are able to form and maintain stable family units. That's something that has been very much wiped from public education.
Oh, yeah.
It's considered too controversial, or maybe people have different ideas. But if you're looking at a science of anything, it's this action tends to lead to this result. And the best result throughout history, and the only sustainable way of maintaining, is with that family being supported by and not overtaken by any other group. So that was the first foundational principle that I saw in that 7 generations. The other is that there is absolute truth. Because how can you plan for 7 generations out if everything's relative? You can't. There are foundational principles. There are absolute truths. And then the third one is, one of those is, there is a higher power that we can turn to for wisdom and strength when we hit those roadblocks of whatever nature they are. So as I look at this opportunity we have to rethink what education is, how to school our children, anything that's going to endure for that 7 generations will have those 3 things at them, because those are what some people have called self-evident truth, but we don't really look at them that much anymore. And as a result, we've hit a crisis.
Right. And science backs you up on this. The thing that I find so interesting in what's going on is what's not being talked about. Like, there is so much new science, especially in the quantum studies, right? So they not only have they discovered that there's no time, there's not on the quantum level, which is the tiny level for those folks of you that may think, because the term is misused so much. So on the tiny level, there's no time. It's infinite. They can't find time. It isn't there. It's immeasurable. Then the other thing that they've discovered is the fact that we are all connected in this huge, limitless, infinite energy that seems to really support life and good and more energy, and when you listen to a man like Nassim Haramein, and I hope I'm saying his name right, who's really one of the leaders in this whole field, and you listen to what he's discovered recently in the whole connection of everything, in finding the actual unification of everything. So, which is not really a theory. He's been able to prove this mathematically, that this idea that we are all connected and that there is a higher, greater force working with us is actually in science now. So I always think of that. Years ago, somebody said to me, God speaks to you in the language you can hear.
Yeah.
And I can't remember who said it when, it was so long ago, but we have to speak to people in the language of science. And when you look at his work and quantum physics, or Dr. Bruce Lipton's work in epigenetics, all these people are connecting this to spirituality, and we're not teaching it. Unless you are connected to the Gaia network, unless it is a specific particular study of yours because of your particular religious belief, your spirituality. We are not teaching this to children in high school. And on top of not teaching them that, and this great, beautiful mystery and wonder that is the universe and possibly multiverse, not only are we not teaching them that, but we have ceased to teach them great literature. That was one of the biggest shockers of the national core curriculum, was that they took literature out.
Yes. Well, like I said, when I was looking at how the Native American children were raised, a big part of their education were the stories.
Yes.
That they would be told. The stories would be what helped shape their view and help them understand how they were expected to act and how they should act in order for these values to continue on for these future generations.
Yep. Our Cheyenne sister, Dr. Henrietta Mann, who was, I can't remember how long ago, when she was the head of education at University of Montana, was voted by Rolling Stone magazine as one of the top 5 educators in the country. She always says that it's all in the storytelling, that the real value system, she has a book called On the Spirit Walk. And when she, in the chapter on values, that's what she talks about. She talks about how the values of her people, the Cheyenne people, and all Native American people do exactly what you're talking about, Rhonda. They're passed down through these stories. And of course, the human brain, which we know more about now than we ever have. So why are we even thinking about a core curriculum? But the human brain thinks in a narrative. So the idea, Kay Olin, Marianne knows her very well, Kay Olin, our Mohawk friend, who is a storyteller and an elder, like she says, the use of the story as discipline. So the first time a child made a mistake, you told them a story, and you didn't do it in a way that embarrassed them. The grandmother would come over at the end of the day, and we're going to have a little talk, and I'm going to tell you the story, and whatever the consequence or whatever the lesson was, that was the story the child needed to hear. And one of the most beautiful things I thought, and I was actually reviewing Henrietta's work today, and she talks about how there's endless stories. She said there's never a time when stories end in Native America, because if you have to clearly communicate to your community something, or to a child something, you might have to make up a story about it. So, and that becomes part of the legend. And she personally refers to people like Jesus and Buddha as, and most especially for her Jesus, but as the great storytellers. You know, Moses, when she looks at the Bible, what she sees are stories. So even when we look in our own culture, we have these teachings, but what's beautiful about learning it within, like you're talking about, the context of Native America, is we learn to look at our own stories in a new way.
But one of the things that always touches my heart so deeply in what we can learn from the Native teachings is that they believe every child is born with a spark within them.
Yes.
And it is our job as the adults to find it and to help it to grow. And one of the motivators for starting Spark was thinking about what kids were going to need 10 years from now, 15 years from now. And one of the dangers I think humanity is headed for, and this is where the sacred comes into play for me, is the loss of what it means to be human.
Oh.
And human right now, right, what we value in education is accomplishment, is merit, is advancement, is this linear line of degrees. The one who gets the PhD is the best. They've achieved it. And the truth of being human is that we are not just a mind. Mm-hmm. We're a heart, and we're a soul, and we're a spirit that can embody the divine. But that takes work.
Yes.
Truly come to know those places, and this kind of conditioning that we're embarking upon, where kids are not allowed to express their humanity, because if they're crying in school right now, or if they have a bellyache because they're nervous, they're going to be sent home with the fear of they have COVID, right? So there is this danger in really getting further and further away from that kind of we call it like self-literacy, being able to read yourself, your physical needs, your emotional needs, your spiritual needs, your social needs. And they change for a child from day to day. And they need to be taught to tune into this whole other body of information that they embody. Because if they don't, then everyone else is going to know them better than they know themselves. Yeah. And an algorithm is going to end up telling them what they should be or what they're meant to do. Mm-hmm. And they don't develop the resilience and dive into, as you both are saying, Maddi and Rhonda, the mystery of what does it mean to be me, and how do I take care of that, and how do I bring it into the world and contribute in some way,
yes,
society and the earth, and make it better. What do I do with these feelings? I agree with you, Rhonda. Truth is the key. Kids, they learn about the injustices. I don't believe in no white lies for kids. They learn about it, and their hearts become so full, and they get such a reaction. And we call it like, that is truth. When your heart starts beating like that because you feel some injustice, that's the truth. And the dare becomes, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to punch the chicken, or are we going to make chicken soup for the community? I don't know. What are we going to do with that? And I think that's our big dare right now. we're all feeling something, like we're feeling something about education.
Yep.
We're questioning. One of the questions I ask people all the time, if you had a school, what would you do? And honestly, people's eyes light up. They love talking about that. Well, if I had a school, I would do this. And I just think that says something about human beings really having the innate desire to do it better than we do it now.
Yep.
And really thinking about what matters most to the family. And then Maddi and I, we were in New Mexico and we saw this folk art exhibit. And the name of the exhibit was All the World's a Neighborhood. And it was so beautiful because it was the art just expressed what life looked like in the neighborhoods of these communities throughout the world, using materials from their neighborhood. And it left me with the feeling of how important the culture of the neighborhood and the community is, and how we need to just really call on that resource as well, and somehow bring that into education.
Right. And that's sustainability too. Really in the sustainability movement, what they're saying is they really are saying, not just act locally, be local, think global. So we can connect, but it's sustainable future really depends on the community locally, the family, the community. And then instead of flying stuff all over the world, people who are good at gardening and raising food, like my husband, raise food and then share the food, instead of your lawn being a lawn, it's a garden. And so this whole concept of looking at re-examining community and the support that you find within family and community is is really so important. It's just vitally important with everything that's going on right now. And I had another thought, but it left me. So after that,
I think it was self-awareness, the self-awareness issue.
Yes.
That has to be one of the things that we're looking at with this education, because first of all, if you can't know yourself, how can you know anybody else? Right? How can you reach out to other people if you don't see how to fix things within yourself?
Right.
Because when you look inside, you learn that you have power to change things in your heart or in your house. And then by extension, you see that you can make a difference to other people. I have a neighbor, you mentioned the gardens. I have a neighbor about four houses up from me. He turns 90 in 2 weeks, and he lost his wife to a car accident 25 years ago. He's been alone ever since. But he's found that we all do. We all need to be able to reach out to people. That is one of the ways of being whole, being filled. We need that connection.
Yep.
And he has a big plot that he lives on. He's turned a half acre of it into a garden. So every year, this 90-year-old grows a half acre garden. Wow. He grows it for the local food bank and for the neighbors and for himself. And it's just the neatest thing.
It's beautiful.
It is beautiful. And only, everybody keeps talking about starting a barter economy and all this. You can only do that locally. There's no shot that that's going to happen globally. Forget it.
Right.
That's if you really want part of this economy to be where people feel productive, where they have purpose, where kids are gardening, it's got to be done on a local scale. And that's the thing, is that part of what education to me should give a human being is dignity.
Yeah.
And when I can make decisions for myself, when I can figure out how I'm going to have a meaningful life, When I can figure out that I can't ask you to do something I'm not going to ask myself to do. When I can figure out that contributing to other people makes me feel good, then all of that creates a beautiful, dignified human being. We're not ever going to all be the same human being, ever, ever, ever.
And we shouldn't be.
No, and we shouldn't be. That's the beauty of it. The beauty of how we are, as how we were created, is that we're not created to just be, the same little automatons. And when you look at cultures that do that, like, Stalin's famous saying about give me your children until they're 6 years old and I'll own them for life. Because we know now from brain research that all you're doing up until about 6 is downloading information. When you look at cultures that do this, and I'm not saying this for political reasons, this is strictly a cultural observation, but look at the Chinese. They invent nothing. They have to steal everything from everybody. Why they're so good at spying? Because they invent nothing. Because they have raised generations of people who are brainwashed from the time they're young to simply follow what they are told by their government. And so they can't invent. You can't, if you don't create creative individuals, nothing gets created.
Right, and that's humanity. That's the loss of the spark.
That's the loss of the spark, the loss of humanity. Mm-hmm. So you create these people that aren't people. They're the walking dead. But if your motivation in education, if your goal is to see the heart of the child, to have that, to see that spark, encourage that spark, and to give that human a dignified, meaningful, purposeful life, then that's everything. Mm-hmm. That's everything in humanity. And then everyone, whether the person chooses to, I really like driving a truck, I'm going to drive a truck. I really want to be an astrophysicist. Good too. It's all good. If that, like you said, Marianne, that gift, that spark is recognized, we're not competing. There's no judgment. This is the big thing. No, we're not judging. I always refer to what our friend Janine said. She posted it a couple years ago, this beautiful poster that I repost all the time of this guy standing in white robes with a sign that says, non-judgment day is coming.
That's great.
I know. And that's really where we want to get to in education, I think. We're not judging the child.
Well, then within the system too, there's a certain way that authority plays out that's punitive. And I think in the more, having come from the public school system, there is a hierarchy of authority, and there is definitely a shaming and demeaning of teachers where they're not held in the highest of dignity and regard. And so the mindset of the whole system needs to turn around. And again, I keep going back to this idea of sacred, is that the authority figures have to be loving authorities. Without love in school, it is not education. No, it's just not.
It's indoctrination. It's indoctrination.
So one of the ways that we can help enable that, like I said, we have such big school districts here, but it's not even that is the issue. The issue is that so many of the mandates are coming down from the state and national level.
Right.
Have to, in order to get this family-centric system, the one that recognizes the child, that gives the teachers the sacred right to help shape and locate and identify the needs of each child, it has to come back down to the local level. I look at Thomas Jefferson got one of the first public ed systems going in Virginia, and it's very, very different than what we have now. But what he said was, he says, let every man superintend what his own eye can see. And so if you have somebody calling the shots that cannot see in person the person it's affecting, he should not be calling the shots.
I agree.
Exactly. Ladies, I wish we could stay on another hour. And when I have my new podcast in the fall, you'll come back right?
Nice to meet you, Rhonda.
But we have got to run. So wonderful. I can't thank you two enough for being on my final show of this series. And I'm hoping you'll come back for the next one. Thank you all my listeners that have always been with me for the last 2.5 years through the Radical and Sacred Democracy. And thank you so much, Bobby Lacera, my producer, the most wonderful Bobby, and everybody at Strong Island Entertainment and Strong Island Radio. Thank you all. I'll see you in the fall.
Bye, Maddie.
Love
Bye,
you all. Thank you. Lots of love.